hard to know exactly how severe a Russian administration of Ukraine would be, but the experience of the last month has left little love between Ukraine and Russia. So I suspect it would be a very difficult, very hard experience for the people of Ukraine, and probably including the imposition of Russian language requirements and the suppression of Ukrainian identity to some extent. There is a really strongly felt sense that there's a grave injustice that's been inflicted upon the people of Ukraine, and it's been reinforced really by the level of the violence over the last few weeks, the gratuitous, unrestrained violence manifested with the, pretty well industrial scale destruction of cities like Mariupol. That leaves little scope for reconciliation. But at some stage, there needs to be some kind of compromise reached where we end this, where we come to some kind of agreement that doesn't just open the door for a subsequent iteration of conflict. And this is the really worrying thing about, things about wars of the past, where they set the conditions for the next war because there's resentment and fresh anger and bitterness over the past and over abuses of power and of denial of rights of people whose power has been taken from them. That leaves them resentful and eager to then seek vengeance. So this is one of the great tragedies of this kind of conflict, is that this isn't likely to end anytime soon. It's likely to actually set the groundwork for yet another conflict down the path. The idea of an existential challenge between the superpowers is just not really something we've been thinking about for a long, long time. And by not thinking about it, we may well be leaving ourselves vulnerable to just tripping into it, much like happened in Europe in August 1914, where nobody seriously thought that the assassination of an archduke in Serbia was going to make that much of a difference in terms of the way the great powers competed with each other. But the problem at the moment is we don't know what Vladimir Putin's going to do next, and he doesn't really know what Joe Biden and NATO is going to do next, because Biden is showing greater resolve than ever before, and NATO is showing more resolve. Putin has deeply resented the expansion of NATO and has always seen Ukraine as part of the Soviet Union as it was, Russian sphere of influence, and part of the greater Russia. And so he's never really been comfortable with Ukraine as an independent, separate state, particularly as it became more sympathetic towards the West. And so over time, it appears he has become much more intent on winding back the freedom of action for Ukraine to make its own choices about who it wants to align with. And so my sense is that while he wants to take away the prospect of Ukraine ever becoming part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the West, if you like, he's also trying to shore up the sphere of influence of Russia in and around its periphery, and bolster the ability of Russia to assert itself politically, economically, and kind of re-establish the idea of a proud Russian empire, if you like. And that seems to be what's on his agenda. So there's no question that these sanctions will be really hurting the Russian economy and the Russian people. My concern is that what this may do is drive Russia into a more autarkic approach towards engagement with the world. If not complete autarky, then at least one that's more about looking inwards on the relationship with China and with those Commonwealth of Independent States, the former Soviet republics of Central and Southern Middle Eurasia. I'm actually concerned that this may be the unraveling point of the globalization we've come to take for granted. The sanctions are having an effect, but it's a limited effect. And the only way that Putin will actually see that he needs to perhaps change course is if the Russian armed forces are in such a dire situation that he's on the cusp of actually losing. So for that to happen, more pressure needs to be applied. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that without actually escalating? How do you do that without actually making this about a war that's bigger than about Ukraine? I think there's a carefully calibrated approach where you're listening and looking for the cues and the indicators of what's going to cross that threshold and what's not. Providing anti-tank guided weapons and anti-aircraft missiles that seems to be below the threshold. So that kind of support, coupled with food and water and medical support and logistic support, seems to be below that threshold of escalation. And my sense is that that's where we need to continue to apply pressure while offering some hope for a negotiated settlement. We have to find reasonable, honourable compromises that prevent this from getting completely out of hand.